Hello, welcome to Story Time with Miss Rose. I'm sorry that I've been gone for a while. I was having technical difficulty and then some of my friends were able to help me. So hopefully it will go better this time. Anyway, we are going to be still continuing to read Carry On Mr. Bowditch. And we are in chapter 6 with Jean Lee Latham. And so where we left off is Nate's brother Ham went off, and we are going to see if Nate's going to be able to continue school or not. So I have a P.O. box number now that you can send me your stories and illustrations. It is 223 P.O. Box 223, Twin City, Georgia, and that is P.O. Box 223, Old Swainsboro Road, Twin City, Georgia, 30471. Okie dokie. Alright, I'm looking forward to seeing your books that you wrote and your illustrations, and I will consider reading them here. This story is dedicated to all the boys and girls that like adventure. If you want me to specifically call out your name to dedicate a book or a chapter or story to you, just send me your name and where you're from, and I'll be glad to do that. Alright, so here we go. Excuse my hand. Alright, let's see. I'm going to try horizontal this time. Okay. Carry On Mr. Bowditch. Alright, let's see. Chapter 5. If you are following with me, you got your book at the library or online. Or maybe you're borrowing it from a friend. It's good to read 30 minutes every day to strengthen your reading, 20 to say the same, and then less than 20, you decrease in your ability. So let's keep up the reading, okay? Shall we? Alright, let's see here. Chapter 4 is where we left off. And now we're going to chapter 5. There we are. Okay? Alright. A Voice in the Night. It was early winter, a northeaster howl in from the Atlantic bringing rain that changed to sleet and then snow. Nate hugged his thin coat about him and scurried back from an errand. The sleet lashed his face and brought tears to his eyes so that he could not see where he was going. He ran into a man, stumbled and lost his balance. He went down in the mud and slush. "Excuse me." It's good to use your manners, he said. He looked up and recognized the roly-poly man. He gasped, "Excuse me, sir." It was the new pastor of East Church, Dr. Bentley. Everyone said Dr. Bentley was about the brightest man who had ever come to Salem. They said he knew 20 languages. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to know that many languages? Wow. Dr. Bentley helped Nate to his feet, took out a handkerchief. That's like a square fabric that people used to carry instead of tissue. You can still get them, and it's kind of nice to have them. They're soft and reusable. That's good. Dr. Bentley helped Nate to his feet, took out a handkerchief, and wiped at the mud on Nate's clothes. No, excuse me. You're the one who tumbled." He must have noticed how thin Nate's coat was. He said, "This cold spell took a man by surprise, didn't it? No time to get his winter coat out of the garret. It's probably like storage. Nate's answer was always ready. I don't get cold, only sissies need winter coats. Then he saw the heavy coat that bundled Dr. Bentley. I mean, when you're young, you know, of course, when a man gets old, I guess he needs a heavy coat. I mean, Dr. Bentley chuckled. That's all right. Old fellows of 25 like me have to watch their health. He walked along towards the cooperage and with Nate. You're Nathan Bowditch, aren't you? I've heard Master Watson talk about you. You're not in school today? I've quit school to help my father. Dr. Bentley stared at him. What? But that's, he stopped. After a while he said, I'll leave you here, Nate. Goodbye. When Nate got home that evening, Liza was big-eyed. When she had a chance, she whispered, Dr. Bentley came to see Mother. He told her you ought to be getting ready for Harvard right now. Isn't that wonderful? Where a man as bright as Dr. Bentley says you're bright too? What did Mother say? She thanked him, and she smiled and smiled. After he had gone, she didn't smile. She didn't smile, though. She walked back and forth, and Granny said, Stop stewing about that boy and take care of yourself. Something colder than a northeastern settled into Nate's chest. Granny's worried about Mother? Liza nodded. I know, but Mother always laughs and says, I'm all right. She said that today. She said, I'll live to see Nate a Harvard man. Not quite 3 months later, just before Christmas, Mother died. Oh, that's sad. The night after the funeral, Father sat at the table with his head in his hands. I'll do better, Mother, he said. I swear I will. Granny's eyes were sad. I hope so, son, but you're better claw off that lee shore. You're lost your anchor to windward. Mary put her arm around Granny. Why don't you go to bed, dear? Granny sighed. I think I will. Seems like I've lost my tuck. Not quite 2 years later, when Nate was 12, Granny died. Oh. Again, Father sat by the table with his head in his hands. Again he said, I'll do better, Mary. I swear I will. Mary didn't answer. She just looked at Father. Her eyes were sad, as Granny used to be. Nate knew what she was thinking. You've lost your last anchor in windward. 2 months later, something wakened Nate in the night. He raised up on his scrawny elbow and stared into the dark. What was it? He listened. There were only the sounds he had known all these years in Salem, the creaking of the old wooden house buffeted by Atlantic winds. No other sounds, but something had wakened him. He shivered and started to huddle down under the blankets again. Then he heard his father's voice. Father must be talking to Mary. Since Mother and Granny were gone, they all turned to Mary. At first, Father's voice was only a rumble. Then Nate heard the scrape of a chair and the thud of a log being pitched on the fire. For a moment, Father's voice was louder. I think it's a thing for Nate. He's not much good in the cooperage. He's better with his head than his hands. He won't be bringing in any money, but there will be one less mouth to feed. Master Watson always said he was bright, and I talked to Michael Walsh. He said... The chair scraped again. Father's voice died to a rumble. Nate could no longer hear what he was saying, but he had heard enough to know that they were talking about Michael Walsh was a teacher. Nate sat up. The covers fell away, but he did not notice the cold. He was going to go back to school? He must be going away somewhere to school. Father had said one less mouth to feed. Surprised, Nate found tears on his face and wiped them with the back of his hand. "That's funny," he said. "I don't cry. Boys don't blubber." Silly to cry when he was happy enough to burst. He was going back to school, where he didn't know, but somewhere. And after he had learned all he could at that school, he'd go to Harvard. And how he didn't know. He just knew that he would. Latin, he'd have to learn Latin to go to Harvard. The Latin and Greek are a lot of the root words of our words that we use. They said it's a dead language, but it's kind of good to know. My son learned some of it a couple of years ago, and it really helps you understand where the other words are coming from. Maybe that was why he was going away somewhere to school, so he could learn Latin to get ready for Harvard. When he got to Harvard, Nate told himself he'd work hard, harder than he had ever worked in his life. When he finished Harvard, his father could come to his graduation, Mary too, and Liza, maybe the whole family. Father would say, "Nate, I did the right thing when I took you out of the cooperage and put you back to book learning. As a Cooper, you're a good Latin scholar." And they'd laugh together. Nate wished he could jump out of bed now and go talk to his father about it, tell him what he had heard, but that wouldn't be fair. This was Father's surprise. He must have the fun of telling it. Tomorrow at breakfast, that was when Father would tell him he was going back to school. Smiling, Nate lay down again. For a long time he lay there too full of plans to go to sleep. The next morning, when he awakened, it was late. Only Father and Mary were at the table. As Nate ate his breakfast fast, he watched his father's face for some sign of a twinkle to show him he was thinking about the surprise. But Father frowned over a paper he was studying and never looked up. Nate glanced towards Mary to see if she showed a twinkle, but Mary looked pale, as though she hadn't slept very well. At last, Father pushed back his chair and cleared his throat. Nate." He was coming now. "Yes, Father?" "I've been thinking a lot about you, Nate. You know I believe you do better with your head than with your hands." "I think so, too," Nate couldn't keep from grinning. Father said, "I've been talking to Jonathan Hodges about you. You know, the Ropes and Hodges." Nate said, "I know who he is. Mr. Hodges must be the one that talked to Father into sending Nate back to school." Father would pay attention to what Mr. Hodges said. Everyone talked about how well Ropes and Hodges were doing. Just 21 or so, both of them. And they had the biggest ship chandlery in Salem. Nate had been in the chandlery, a long wooden building on Neptune Street near Union Wharf. The chandlery was crammed with everything for ships, everything from barrels of salt, beef, to cables and marline spikes. Yes, Father would pay attention to what Mr. Hodges said. Father frowned and seemed to be hunting for words. Jonathan Hodges thinks you show a good bit of promise, Nate. He thinks a couple of months, maybe 3, under Michael Walsh will give you just what you need. 2 months under Michael Walsh, or 3. Nate tried to figure it out. Mr. Walsh was right here in town. Father had said there would be 1 less mouth to feed. Father said, "Mr. Hodges knows you're quick at figures. He says Mr. Walsh can teach you enough bookkeeping in 2 or 3 months, then Ropes and Hodges will sign your papers. He looked at the paper he had been studying and then handed it to Nate. Nate began to read. Indenture. This indenture witnessed that Nathaniel Bowditch hath put himself and by thence presents doth voluntarily of his own free will and accord, and with the consent of Habakkuk Bowditch, put and bind himself apprentice to Ropes and Hodges, to learn the art, trade, and mystery of ship chandlery for and during a term of 9 years. Nate picked up the paper and held it in front of his face. 9 years, until he was 21. For 9 years he would belong to the ship's chandlery of Ropes and Hodges. For 9 years. That's almost a decade. A decade's 10 years. The paper blurred in front of his eyes. He caught a sentence here and there, during all which said term the said apprentice Nathaniel Bowditch shall faithfully serve. He shall not absent himself by day or night from the same Ropes and Hodges service without leave. He'd live there too. That was what father had meant, no money. He had said just one less mouth to feed. He'd live there. In 2 months or 3, just as soon as he knew enough bookkeeping, he'd leave home and go to live with Mr. Ropes and Mr. Hodges. For 9 years, he would not leave the day by day or night without permission. Father said, "Well, Nate, what do you think?" Nate stole a glance from behind the paper towards Mary. Poor Mary. She looked so worried. Hab had said boys took care of girls and women, kept them from worrying. Nate managed to grin. "I think I'll do better with bookkeeping than barreled Steve's. All right, there's just one part of this that bothers me." "Yes, Nate?" "It says here I must not contract matrimony after all when a man is 12. Mary said, "Oh, Nate, you simpleton." Her laugh was shaky, but she did laugh. Nate got up quickly. "I think I'll hurry right over to Mr. Walsh." He whistled while he found his slate and pencil. He whistled until he was out of the house and up the street. Then the whistle died. All the way to Mr. Walsh's house, Nate's feet seemed to beat out the words, 9 years, 9 years, 9 years. 2 or 3 months to study bookkeeping, then no more school ever. Indentured, Nathaniel Bowditch. Oh, wow, that's a lot different than what he thought. He thought he was going to be able to go to school and then go to Harvard. See, usually when children are about 13, well, time between 13, they would go off and learn to trade with their dad or trade with someone else. And so, this is about what's going to happen. So that was the end of chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Have a great week. I will see you tomorrow for chapter 6.